What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Neighborhood Podcast. One of the hosts of the podcast, my name is Kyle Dabro, and in today's segment, we're going to go over the upcoming Raiders and Seahawks game, and then after the game analysis, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the Seahawks and the margin of error that they're working with in a very competitive NFC West. But as far as the game is concerned between the Raiders and the Seahawks, I think the Seahawks have the advantage in this one. When I look at the Seahawks this year, they've been one of the biggest surprises compared to any other team in the NFL as far as I've seen it. Because frankly, I didn't see the Seahawks being in technically first place with the 49ers 12 weeks into the season. But they have a chance to improve to 7-4 against the Raiders, and I think they have a very good chance to and improve their overall seeding in the NFC West if they're able to win this game. And I think it's really been predicated on the meteoric rise that we've seen from Geno Smith this year, who's, as far as I see it, definitely one of the top candidates for the most improved player of the year. And then you got Pete Carroll, who's definitely in a discussion for head coach of the year if the Seahawks continue to win games from here on out. And I think this is a game where I think the Seahawks, with the offensive weaponry that they have at their disposal, I think they have a very good chance to be able to essentially slice and dice this Raiders defense, which is essentially nothing to brag about. And the Raiders as a whole, they've been one of the more underwhelming teams this year. They've only won 3 games. Granted, they have been playing in a very competitive AFC West, and it is very difficult to essentially play top tier football against teams like the Chiefs, the Chargers, and the Broncos. But the Raiders, with the pieces that they have on their roster, they have really underperformed. For them to only have 3 wins under their belt, and we're almost in December, that's a major disappointment as far as I see it. And I think depending on how the last month and a half of the season works out for them, we kind of have to focus on how the Raiders are going to move forward with Josh McDaniels as their head coach. But, when I look at this game and how I think it's going to transpire, I just favor Seattle's offense over the Raiders defense. And I think it's just because when I look at Geno Smith, Kenneth Walker, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, I just think that the overall pieces that they have to work with, I think that Raiders defense is not going to be able to handle them consistently throughout the game. And I think there's a very good chance that the Seahawks are going to be able to put up 25, potentially 30 points in this game, simply just because the Raiders defense has shown time and time again to give up points. And that puts a lot of pressure on the Raiders offense, which, to be frank, has been dealing with a bunch of injuries. Darren Waller has missed a considerable amount of time this year. Hunter Renfro's been out of the lineup. And granted, they do have Devontae Adams to work with, but it's tough to work with when you're missing some pretty key pieces on the offensive side of the ball. And not only that, Josh Jacobs is questionable for this game. My opinion is I think he'll play, just because usually when you're ruled questionable, and I haven't seen any reports saying that he's going to be a game time decision, but if I had to bet on it, granted I'm no doctor in any way, shape, or form, I'd probably bet more likely than not that he'll play. We'll see how effective he's going to be against Seattle, but even with him on the field, I think it gives the Raiders a little bit of a chance to put up some points, but I don't think it's going to be enough to go up against this Seahawks defense. And granted, I've always been of the mindset that the Achilles heel of the Seahawks this year has been their defense, and they have shown at times to give up points in pretty big chunks, but not in this game. I think Seattle's defense is going to be able to limit the Raiders to around 17 to 20 points, just because the Raiders haven't shown consistency to put up 25, 30 plus consistently. And I think when it comes to the Seahawks, I think they're going to be able to force some turnovers against the Raiders as well. So don't be surprised if that Seahawks defense forces a turnover or two, and then Geno Smith and company can take advantage of that and put some points on the board off of those turnovers. So as far as I see the result being, I got the Seahawks winning this one by a touchdown. It could get to a 2-possession game, maybe 10 points at most. That's kind of where I see this game playing out. If I had to put a score on it, I'm going to say Seattle wins this one by the score of 27-20. They would bump up to 7-4 for their record, and they would reclaim first place in the NFC West if they were to get this win. But with the game analysis aside, let's actually focus on the bigger picture here when it comes to the Seahawks. The Seahawks have to be very careful here for the rest of the year, because as far as I see it, their margin of error is pretty slim to work with. They got to contend with the 49ers, who have been relatively decent the last couple weeks. And when I look at the one-on-one matchup between the 49ers and the Seahawks, I have to be honest with you guys. I think the 49ers are a better team top to bottom than the Seahawks. Now, granted, the Seahawks have been a very surprising team this year, but I think the 49ers have the requisite pieces to be able to really control their own destiny because they have just solid targets on the offensive side and the defensive side of the ball as well. So, when I look at the Seahawks here, let's just kind of go through their next couple of weeks on their schedule. They got the Raiders this Sunday, so I think they'll be able to win that one pretty convincingly. So we'll give that a win. They would bump to 7-4. They play the Rams on the road the week after that in week 13. The Rams are nothing to brag about this year. They've been a very disappointing team, and they've been dealing with a bunch of injuries. They're just not the same team from last year. So I think Seattle goes on the road, and they win that game. After that, they play the Panthers at home. The Panthers are one of the worst teams in the NFC South this year. They have been competitive in some games, but I think Seattle should be able to win that one pretty solidly. So that would be a 3-game win streak for them. And, you play that scenario out before they would play the 49ers the week after that, they could potentially be at a 9-4 record. And then, to me, the entire season for them rides on the 2 games after the Panthers game. You got the 49ers at home, and you got the Chiefs on the road. They have to win one of those games. And if I had to guess, the more pivotal one, as far as I see it, is that divisional matchup against the 49ers. If the Seahawks have any chance to win the NFC West this year, they have to split the season series with the 49ers, because if they lose to the 49ers would sweep the season series of the Seahawks. And I think as long as the 49ers would be able to continue their success, I think the 49ers would have a much easier path to win the NFC West than the Seahawks. So, granted, I know the Chiefs game is probably going to be a bigger challenge just because the Chiefs are one of the better teams. They're probably the best team in the NFL. So that's going to be a major challenge for them. But to me, everything is indicative of how this 49ers game is going to work out when we hit December 15th. And if the Seahawks win that game, I think they'll be in a better position to win the NFC West. But if they lose that game, you could pretty much wrap it up. The 49ers would have a much easier path to win the NFC West. And then after the Chiefs game, which takes place on Christmas Eve, they finish out with the Jets at home, and then they finish with the Rams at home for the last game of the year. So there are some winnable games for the Seahawks here, but there's definitely some challenges. And to me, everything is focused on December 15th and December 24th. That first one on the 15th is the 49ers game, and then the Chiefs game on Christmas Eve. If the 49ers win that game, like I said, it's pretty much a wrap for the Seahawks. But if the Seahawks win that game, it's going to be very interesting to see how those last 2 to 3 weeks play out in the NFC West, because things could get very competitive. And at that point, we don't really know what could happen. Time will tell. But when it comes to that Seahawks offense going up against that 49ers defense in that pivotal divisional matchup, that to me is going to be the decisive factor of the game. If the Seahawks offense, can put up points against that 49ers defense, I think it's going to play out quite well for them. And then we'll see whether or not that Seahawks defense can hold up against Jimmy G and that 49ers offense, which is pretty powerful as far as I see it. They could put up points in bunches. And if the Seahawks get into a shootout, it's going to be a very interesting matchup for them. And I don't know necessarily if the Seahawks could put up enough points against the 49ers in that scenario. But, granted, that's still about 3.5 weeks away. So we'll kind of see how things play out. But, the Seahawks have a good path here. I think they got a very good chance to win 3 games before that matchup against the 49ers. And then I think the entire division comes down to that 49ers game. So time will tell. We'll just kind of see how things play out from here. But with that said, you guys, that's pretty much all I've got to talk about with the Seahawks and the Raiders game. We will talk about some more upcoming matchups that are going to take place on Sunday in Week 12, so stick around for that. But once again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in a little bit.